Hello, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to look at the simple pendulum, and we are using the simple free app which is the Fed Simulator. This is a free app which you can find online to simulate various projects. In fact, you can perform a lot of experiments using the Fed Simulator. So right away we look at a simple pendulum. The pendulum is simply a mass which is attached to a string, or it could be a fixed rod of a certain length. Now, we can use the pendulum to perform various functions. For example, the grandfather's wall clock does use the pendulum in terms of keeping time, and we can use the pendulum also to calculate the gravitational field strength on a certain planet or place, which will be discussed in later topics. So the length of the pendulum, we measure it from the middle of the mass to where the string is tied. That gives us the length of the pendulum. So in this simulator, the FLEX simulator, we can be able to use these little gadgets, these little buttons here, to increase or reduce the length of the pendulum. So we can make it as short as we want it to be. In this case, I have 0.1 meters. Then we can also try to increase the mass or reduce the mass. So we are going to see first what the period of the pendulum is. So I'm going to set the length. I'm going to set the length to 0.8. There we go. So the length of the pendulum is 0.8 meters, which you can see right now if I put my meter rule against the pendulum. So we measure from the fixed point there where the zero is to the middle part of the mass, and that's 80 centimeters, which is 0.8 meters. Now, the period of a pendulum is the time it takes to make one oscillation. So what is an oscillation then? An oscillation, for example, if I were to displace the pendulum to this position and I release it, when it moves from that position, passing through the middle, going to the other side, then coming back to the starting position in that format, then it makes one complete oscillation. Now the time it takes for it to move through one complete oscillation is what we call the period of the pendulum. And since it's time, we use the second to measure the period of the pendulum. So if I let go of it, then it makes 1, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the like. So you can keep on counting the number of periods. Now this pendulum which I have here won't stop because there is no friction, no air resistance which has been applied. So this doesn't represent a real life situation here on Earth because there is air which will provide a dampening force on the pendulum. But I can increase the force by just sliding this, you know. And already you can see the effect. The pendulum is slowing down and eventually to come to a standstill. So by moving the friction slide, you can increase the friction, the amount of air resistance that the pendulum feels, or you can reduce it further. Also, gravity here, you can be able to increase the acceleration or the force due to gravity on the pendulum, or you can just use the slide down menu here, select on the moon, Earth, Jupiter, or a certain planet. So right now I have it set on Earth. 0.8. Then down here we can include the stopwatch, which we can use to measure the time it takes for a certain number of oscillations. We can even include the period tracer to show us when it makes one complete oscillation. So you can see there, it shows you that it has made one complete oscillation. Okay. So now for the first part of this lesson, we are going to try and calculate the period of this pendulum at a length of 0.8 meters. So it's quite difficult for us to quickly start the stopwatch and stop it for us to measure the period. So what we are going to do is we are going to time 10 oscillations, then record the time for 10 oscillations on our stopwatch, and then use that information and calculate the period of one oscillation. So the friction is too much. Let me just reduce it a bit. That's better. Yes. Okay. So the good part about this, you just need to start the stopwatch at the beginning of an oscillation. So in this case, I'm going to displace my pendulum to 10 degrees, allow it to swing, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. When we stop. Okay, so in this case, you saw that I didn't start the stopwatch when I released the pendulum. That's because I wanted to be as accurate as possible. So I allowed the pendulum face to move to my left. Then when it reached its topmost point, that's when I started the stopwatch, and that's when I started counting the 10 oscillations. So in this case, we've got 10 oscillations, which have got 17.79 seconds. So for us to find the period of the pendulum, then we divide 17.79 seconds by the number of oscillations, which in this case is 10. So our period gives us then to be 1.779 seconds as the period for this pendulum. Join me again as we look at factors which affect the period of the pendulum in our next